All right, this is 8.4, volume of prisms. A couple things that we need to know is what volume is. Volume is the number of cubes it takes to fill something, or the amount of space that thing takes up. There's two different ways of looking at it: is how much space it takes up, how much three-dimensional space it takes up, or how much three-dimensional space it takes to fill it. So when I say three-dimensional, that means that all of the labels are going to be units cubed if you're finding volume. It might be inches cubed or feet cubed or centimeters cubed based on the size of the cube, but we're filling it with cubes. All right, so we also need to know what prisms are. So prisms are polyhedrons, meaning they're made out of all polygons, which have to have flat sides, can't have any curves or anything like that, okay? And they have two congruent parallel bases. So not only do they have to have congruent bases, but they have to be parallel as well. The one that we're most familiar with is the rectangular prism. By the way, we name them by the shape of their base. The rectangular prism, any side can be the base of a rectangular prism because it's made out of all rectangles and every single side has a congruent parallel base to it. So we have a picture here and kind of a picture of one layer of cubes filling up the bottom. We're going to call the bottom the base this time. So it'd be the base under here, the base that it's sitting on. And you can get a kind of a picture of the volume when you look at that and say, oh, I can count the number of cubes it takes in one row. It takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then how many rows are there? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So that means there's 24. 6 times 4 is 24. There'd be 24 of those little cubes on that bottom layer. Then what we need to do is know how many layers it takes. Well, it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 layers. So will have 24 cubes in each one of those 8 layers. And that's where we get this formula, volume equals big B times H. Notice the big B is a capital B. It stands for the area of the base. So whatever the shape of the base is, you have to do that formula. In this case, it's a rectangle, so we just do volume equals, for a rectangle, we just do little b h times h. The problem is these aren't the same h. This h is the height of the base. This h back here is the height of the rectangular prism. So in this case, I could take 6 times a height of 4 to get my 24. There's your 6 times 4, which gets you the area of the base to be 24. Then I have to take it times the height, not of that base, but the height of the shape, which we found to be 8. And we can then take 24 times 8 to get the volume. Area of the base was 24. 8 stacks of that 24, if you want to think about it that way. And we get our answer of 192 in units cubed, because all volume is in units cubed. All right, we'll do a couple problems here as examples. The next one is also a rectangular prism. You notice that it has all sorts of sides. It has 6 sides. It has a front and a back. It has a right and a left. And it has a top and a bottom. And like I said, this is the only shape, the rectangular prism cube, that's another, but it's a rectangular prism as well. But those are the only shapes that any side can be the base. I want to pause and make sure that you hear me. You're not always picking the bottom as the base. You have to pick it by which ones are congruent and parallel, because that's how they become a base. So in this case, I might take the front and take 7 times 4 to find the area of the base. Remember, my formula is volume equals area of the base times the height. I recognize the base to be a rectangle, so I took the little b of 4 times the little h of 7 and got 28. Now I have to go to the height of the entire prism. That means from this base to its congruent parallel base back here, they are 11 apart. So the height of this thing is 11. And all I have to do is take 28 times 11, which would be, what is that, 308? And of course, we're going to put units cubed. It would take 308 little cubes to fill up that rectangular prism. Look at the next shape. The next shape is not a rectangular prism. It is a triangular prism. Well, you might notice that the only ones that are congruent and parallel would be this back triangle and the front triangle. So volume equals big B times H, but I have to treat the big B a little bit differently because it's a triangle. Remember what the formula for triangle was? Little bh divided by 2. So I'm going to take 5 times 6, because they're at a right angle, and get 30, and then divide by 2, and it gets me an area of 15. Now, what's the height? Remember, the height is the distance between those two bases, right? That distance right there of 12 is going to be our height. So it has a base area of 15, it has a height of 12, and when I multiply those, I get 180. Again, we're in volume, so it's in units cubed. So the first thing you should do is, when you look at the next one, identify the shape. It has a lot of rectangles, and then it has two trapezoids, and the trapezoids are the congruent parallel bases. So that's the shape of my base. So when I think about volume equals big B times H, the big B is a trapezoid. Remember, that's 1/2 height times base 1 plus base 2. So now I have to figure out the bases. That'd be the 6 and the 2. I add them together and get 8. The height is at a right angle, so that's going to be the 5. And I'm taking 1/2 times 5 times 8. Well, that gets me 20. The area of the base is 20. Now, what's the height of the entire shape? Remember, that H is different than the H we were using a moment ago. This H over here was the height of the trapezoid. This height is the height of the trapezoidal prism, which is the distance from that front trapezoid to that back trapezoid, so 3. And we take 20 times 3, we get our answer of 60, and we're in volume, so units cubed. All right, might end up with a time where they give you the answer and you have to work backwards. So the first one is a rectangular prism. I have two measurements, this 8 and this 3, but it tells me the volume as well. So they've done the problem. They've done this formula, volume equals big B times H, and they got 120 for their answer. So I can put that in for the volume. I can find the area of that bottom rectangle, which could be a base, by taking 8 times 3 and getting 24. And now I have an algebraic equation not to do, but to undo, right? So they multiplied by 24 to get there. We're going to divide by 24 to get there. When we do that, that of course cancels out, and we're left with H on this side equals, and 120 divided by 24 is 5. So that tells me that the height is 5. So remember, where should you start? You should start the problem with the formula that you know. In this case, the base was a rectangle, so you had this formula. Volume equals base times height, where the heights are different heights, right? The first one is the height of the base. The second height, that one, is the height of the entire rectangular prism. Or you might end up with something like this second problem, where I have the base that is congruent and parallel as this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-sided figure. This is what you call a hexagonal prism. That hexagon is the base. So when I go to do volume equals big B times H, there is no formula for area of a hexagon. So we have to go back to what we did a couple sections ago and cut it into shapes that we know. Okay, so I'm going to cut it here and find the area of these two rectangles and add them together. So I have a 10 by 3, a 10 by 1, which is 10. And then I have a 6 by 4, which is 24. If I add those together, that 24 and that 10 become 34. And that 34 is the area of the base. We then have to go determine the height. Well, how far is it from that hexagon back to the back hexagon in this case? It's 3, so I have a height of 3. So now to find the volume, all we have to do is take that 34 times 3, and we get 102. So the volume is 102 units cubed. I'm not sure if I said that on the last problem, but when we got that one, we got an answer of 5, I believe it was. That would not be units cubed, that would just be units, because we didn't solve for the volume. we already had the volume. We were solving for this one-dimensional height. So in this case, in the second problem, we're back to finding the volume. So we multiply, and now we have a volume telling you it takes 102 little cubes to fill it. And the final problem, notice this is not a prism, but we can treat it like a prism. A cylinder is kind of like a prism in the fact that it has congruent parallel bases. It has a congruent parallel circle this time. That's why we can't call it a prism, is because it has a curve, right? But we can still use the same formula since it has the same basic shape. Volume equals base times height. Big B, area of the base. So let's think about how we would do that. Well, now that the base is a circle, to find the volume, I need to use the formula for area of a circle. So let's write that in there. How do I find the area of a circle? I take the radius, I square it, I take it times pi, and then I take it times the height of the entire cylinder, right? So now, let's fill that in. I have the radius to be 14. I know that pi is 3.14. And then the height is the distance between the top circle and the bottom circle in this case, right? The bases, which is 20. So all we have to do is type in 14 squared times pi times 20. When I do this first part, 14 squared times pi gets 615.44. That is the area of the base, right? Now I just take it times 20 because I'd be able to put 20 stacks of that many in there. And you get an answer of 12,308.8 units cubed for the volume. To review, the big idea is the formula volume equals big B times H. Remember, big B stands for the area of the base, and that H stands for the height, which the height is the distance between those two bases. So whichever bases you're using, you have to find the height between those. And you will only have two possible bases unless it is a rectangular prism where any side could be a base. But then you have to be really careful. So if I had a rectangular prism like this, and let's say this is 5, and this is 2, and this is 10, okay? If I chose this as my base, then this would be the other base, and the height would be 10. If I chose this as my base, then its congruent parallel side is back here, and my height would be 5, the 5 it is between them. And if I chose the top, then its congruent parallel base would be the bottom, and the height of it would be 2. So make sure you're choosing the right numbers based on which bases you're using. The other key to this lesson is what this works for. It works for all prisms, which are polyhedrons that have congruent and parallel bases, two of them. And it also works for cylinders. Those are the two shapes that it works for.